In this lecture, we are going to continue building the header section of our project, using some CSS properties that you're already familiar with. And you're also going to learn the easiest way to center anything in CSS with transform, top, and left, which is something really important. So this is where we left after the last lecture. So let's now take a look at the final product. And so what we're going to do in this lecture is to just add this small logo here, and then we're also going to add this heading here. So this is the plan for this lecture, and let's start with the image. So first off, in the HTML, we actually have to add that image. So let's remove the text here, and what I'm going to do now is to add first a div, and then inside that div is where I'm going to put an image. Because the image is actually an inline element, and so I think it's a better practice to first have a small container where this image is inside, and then position that container to where we want the image and the container to be. So first I'm writing a div with a class of logo box, and then in here I'm going to put the image. So we go into the image folder, so img, and then from here the logo that we want is called logo white. So it's this one here. So img and then logo white. And then we also give it an alt attribute. And remember that the alt attribute is to describe the image for SEO, so search engine optimization, but also for the case that somehow the image fails to load. And then on the website, instead of the image, appears this text, so that users can still see what the image that isn't there is all about. So I'm just going to put here logo. Then I'm also going to add a class and call it just logo. So we have a logo box and then logo. So let's now style it. So first the logo box and then the logo after that. And remember where we want to put the image. So it's here in this corner. And so one good way of doing this is to use absolute positioning. And I'm once again sure that you already know how absolute positioning works, but in the next section there's a big lecture which talks about the difference between absolute and relative positioning and the normal flow and floats and all of that stuff, so that you really understand how all of this works behind the scenes, okay? But for now, let's just simply use the position absolute like you already know how to do. And we can then use top, bottom, left and right properties to put the image exactly where we want it to be. So let's say we want the top to be 40 pixels and the left to be 40 pixels. Now, where does this measurement actually start? So from where, counting from where, is these 40 pixels and also these 40 pixels? There has to be some kind of a reference, right? So a place from which we start to count 40 pixels to the left and 40 pixels from the top, right? And that reference is a parent element which has its position set to relative. And so we should also do that. And remember that the header is the parent element, right? So logo box and the parent is the header. And so we should go to header and set its position to relative. Position relative. And so now this is the origin, so the reference from which top and left start to count, okay? Now just before we check if this already looks good, let's just specify the size of the image itself. So we say height 35 pixels. That should be okay. And then the width will scale accordingly. So we don't even have to specify it. All we do is to specify the height, and the width will be automatically figured out by the browser. We could instead also set the width, and then the height would be figured out by the browser, but I'd prefer to do it like this. I always prefer to control the height of the elements. So let's now take a look. And indeed, there it is. Okay, so this part is completed. Let's now take care of this primary heading that we have here. So this one here, right? So back to the HTML, right after this logo box, we will have our primary heading. So I'm going to use the h1 element and call it heading primary. All right. Now let's actually go back to take a look at how we want this. So we want it basically to have two parts. So we have this entire text here, but this is all the H1. Remember that the H1 is the single most important heading on the page, which is important for Google or for any other search engine to figure out what our web page is all about. And so it's important that we basically put the title of our web page in there. Now we could only just put outdoors in there, so make this the H1, and then, for example, make an H2 here for the secondary header, and put this is where life happens in there. But that's not what we want, because we don't want our primary text or title of the website to say just outdoors, right? We want all of this text. And so we must somehow divide this text. So what are we going to do? We are going to use the span element. And the span element is perfect for this because remember that a span is simply to style some text differently. And so we can just put two span elements in here, one for each part, one for the top and one for the bottom. So span class heading primary main, and then the same for the part in the bottom. So let's call it sub. So the first one says outdoors, and down here is where life happens. So that's basically the slogan of the company. And with that, we're good to go and to format this text. So heading primary, let me already copy it. And then also main, and then also for the sub. So the first thing that we want is the color to be white, and that is just this FFF code. So in RGB, FFF is basically the same as saying this one here, okay? And you see that both of them are the complete white. So the presence of all the colors at the same time. So it's complete red, complete green, and complete blue. Okay, but this is enough. Now another thing that we want is the text to be uppercase. So we say text transform uppercase. And for now that should be enough. Let's just take a look. And alright, so our text is already here, it's already white. It's not quite where we want it to be, but we're going to take care of that later. Next, what we want to do is to put this on top and this below it, right? So we want outdoors on top, and then after that, this part here. Also, this text should be bigger and this one smaller. And also, as you see, it has this huge spacing here. So I did this to make it look really big, to give it some space to breathe. I think this looks like outdoors. It looks great with all this spacing. That's why I decided to go this way. So let's style it like this in the code here. So what should we do in order to put these two parts of the text one under another? Do you have any idea of a good way of doing this? I think the best way is to display them both as block level elements. Because remember that block elements occupy the entire width that they have available, and more importantly for this case, they create line breaks after and before them. And so that's exactly what we want. So a span element is by default an inline element, so it's just like text. And so we use the display property, display, and display it as a block. Simple as that. And the same thing down here for the other span element. Display and also block. So that solves that part. Now they need different font sizes. So let's set this one to 60 pixels. Give it a font weight of 400, because by default the H1 has a higher font weight, okay? And then we also give it a letter spacing of, let's say, 35 pixels. Okay, and now similar specifications down here for the sub part of the H1. So a font size in this case of 20 pixels, font weight of 400 as well. And the letter spacing, I'm going to put it to 15 pixels. Just to try it out, then if it doesn't look good, we can always come back and adjust it. So I'm going to reload. And alright, it already looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the inspector here, so to see what's happening here. And indeed, so this is now a block and this is another block. It occupies 100% of the width, as you can see in the blue box, exactly like a block element should behave. And of course, this also forces them into another line. Now we need to slightly increase the letter spacing here. So 17 looks good. Maybe 17.5, 17.4. Okay, so that looks about right. So let's memorize this. So 7.4. And then also the weight of the font here looks a bit too thin here compared to that one. Okay, so let's also increase that. So letter spacing is 17.4 pixels. And now let's take a look at which weights we actually have available. So we have 100, 300, 400, 700, and 900. So these are the font weights that are loaded for this specific Lato font. So we had 400, so let's now jump up to 700. Taking a look again. And yeah, so this looks much better now. All right, and with that formatted, we should now find a way to make this displayed exactly in the center, right? Now, of course, this should stay exactly in the center, no matter what the screen size is. So no matter the width and no matter the height of the window, right? No matter what height we have for the screen, we always want this to stay in the middle, because of course we're building a responsive website here. And more about that later again. But for now, what we need to focus on is to put this text here exactly here in the center. So let's find out how we're going to do that. Now, first off, let's go back to our markup here in HTML, because we're actually going to put all of this in a different box, in a container, because we're going to add something more into this box later on. I can actually show you. We're going to add this button here, also in the same box, which also should stay in the center by then. All right, so we cannot just center this part here, but we're going to center an entire box like this. I'm going to show you. So this entire box here is what we're going to do and to center. So let's just call it text box for now. And then I'm going to put all of this inside. So text box is what we're going to style next. Putting it here just to follow the natural order of the HTML. So text box. So what is the best way to exactly center that box in the middle of our header? And the answer is that once again, we're going to use absolute positioning. All right, so position absolute again. Now about the top and the left, they will have to be a bit different. And I'm going to show you how. So we start by saying top 50% and left 50%. And just to illustrate this a bit better, I will actually put a background color here, okay? Background color, something, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just putting red here. And now I'm going to show you what happens. All right, so this is not quite where we want it to be, right? But actually the code did what we wanted, because this here is clearly 50% from the left, right? This part of the box, which is where the measure starts. So where the 50% starts counting. It's from this side all the way to this side, and it's 50%. It's half of the element, half of the header. That's what left 50% means. It's 50% of the width of the parent element, and it's actually working. And the same thing applies to the top. So it's from here to here, it's actually 50%. It's half of the height of the parent. Now what we want to do in order for this to be exactly in the center is to shift this just a little bit so that the center of this box is here in the center, is here, right? That's where we want it. So we want this middle of the box to be just here where now the beginning of the box is. And the same thing applies to the height. So we want this center here of the box, this horizontal center, we want it to be here where the box now begins. So another way what we want is to translate this entire box. And it's actually pretty easy to do. We just need to use the transform property in CSS. Transform and translate. Translate. And now we just need to specify how much we want to translate on X and on epsilon. And what we want is minus 50% for both. And that's it. And that's because these 50% are now no longer in relation to the parent element, but of the element itself. And so if we say we want minus 50%, it will be shifted half of the width to the left side. And the same for the height. So minus 50% says that it will be shifted 50% of the element's height to the top. And so here it is. It's now exactly at the middle, vertically and also horizontally. It's completely in the middle now. Now, because of this wedge that we cut out here, it looks a bit weird. It looks like it's actually more down than where it should be, right? It looks like it should be like somewhere here. And so instead of shifting it down 50%, maybe we can just do 40%. So we say that the top should be 40%, and then that should fix our problem. So this looks actually a lot better. And just to confirm that everything works as expected, you can just see that this nicely adapts to when we decrease the screen size. The same, we'll just do it like this. The same happens with the viewport height. So it always stays nicely, not exactly in the center, but at these 40% top where we specified it to be. All right, so you learned a great new trick. Maybe you had already used it because I taught it in my other course as well, but I think I didn't explain it this well. So I thought it was important to make it really clear how this works, because it's really important. You can now use these concepts for other things, because now you totally understand how this worked. So again, just to make everything 100% sure, these 40% and these 50%, they are in relation to the parent element. So 50% of the parent element is where the text box was located to the left side. But on the transform here, when we translate it, this is in relation to the element itself. And this makes it possible that the element is exactly at the center. All right, and that's enough for this lecture. Next time we're going to do this little nice animation that we see here when we reload the page. So this, you saw it coming in from the left side, and this one from the right side. Let's do it again. This entrance animation here, that's what we're going to do next, which is really exciting, I think. So stay tuned and see you in a second.